there was a part of my mind also just imploding. Like, what the hell is going on with me? Like, I have no context for this. I have no prior experience with this. I'm not around people for whom this is like a regular thing. I've heard about it. It always sounded a little nutty to me, but I can't say that I'm surprised any longer.
Today's guest is Jonathan Van Valen.
You could imagine, let's say, a gigantic, an enormous ball, and you are actually at the center of it. And on the inside surface of that enormous ball, this globe, there's like a little postage stamp picture of every single person.
He had a near-death experience that, of course, was really fascinating. And it also challenges the materialist idea that when you die, you die.
And that's realer than real. And I would say that makes sense to me, in vivid sense to me, and it's very consistent with what I tried to describe in terms of, well, this physical reality, this physical body is what felt as though it had the illusory quality to it. And try to point to where that love is located. It's like it begins, it's impossible to you can't put your finger at it like it's there or it's over here. But would you deny in any way whatsoever that the love that you felt was somehow real?
So now for my conversation with Jonathan Van Valen.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF just happened.
Everyone, today I'm speaking with Jonathan Van Valen. He is a near-death experiencer and a shared death experiencer. And we met, was it 2 years ago, 1 year ago at the IANDS conference? So it's the Arizona one. That was about a year ago then.
About a year ago. Yep.
Exactly a year ago, because I just got back from their other conference.
Yeah. And we met and spoke in New York when I was there in October.
Yes, we met up there, which was great. And your story's really interesting, and I'm excited to share it with everyone. So first of all, just introduce yourself a little. Tell us about who you are.
Sure. Well, I've spent the last couple of years actually devoted to exactly what we're talking about in terms of sharing and teaching and writing and things of that nature, healing work with people. And it's grown out of all of the experiences that you just mentioned and many, many others as well. And prior to that, I've, mostly led what you'd call a very ordinary life. And there were things like jobs, and I don't know if I'd even call them careers, but, life. I grew up and lived most of my life out of the city of Seattle. And so it was a regular urban existence. And, we could go into far more detail, but it's probably not as interesting as what we're here to talk about. But I guess I would add only that, in my case, there was nothing in my own background that had anything to do with anything particularly spiritual or religious or anything in any way that would have naturally sort of prepared me for any of the things that we're about to talk about. So those things came as a really dramatic shift in things that took some getting used to, because these were experiences that were really very far outside the context of just about anything I had any otherwise direct experience with. There was maybe a couple of little glimpses as a young person, but overall life was very conventional and didn't have any relation to this sort of thing. So.
What did you think? Did you think there was an afterlife or anything like that? Did you not even think about it? Were you atheist? Religious?
No, I went through a few phases. I certainly went through a very atheist phase, actually, as a young person. In terms of just rejecting conventional religion, I couldn't wrap my head around that. I do remember being in church as a little kid and hearing all the stories and literally looking up at the altar and the priests and thinking, this doesn't make any sense to me at all.
I agree with you. I still don't think, I mean, I want to be careful in saying that because there are people who are grieving and if you get so much strength from that. So I'm just talking from my materialist science perspective. To me, it makes no sense.
I felt that way as a young person also. And I still feel that interestingly, way. I began over time, much more time, to have a great appreciation for what religion offers people, even if I don't always personally buy into some of the dogma that goes with it. But like you just mentioned, people can derive an enormous amount of comfort from the religious traditions. They can derive, some guidance from them in ways that are truly positive. And we don't need to labor over the subject more than that. But as a young person, I had rejected that. And as I got a little older, my conception of death really for a while as a young person into my early 20s and that sort of thing was sort of like, I thought of it as a leaf falling from a tree. Like it was there, it was vibrant, it was green, and then it changed colors and it fell to the ground and just kind of disappeared. And that was the end of that. And I didn't see any need for any further story or explanation. It just, that leaf just fell to the ground and kind of dissolved into non-existence. And that wasn't something that I found uncomfortable at all. It just seemed, in fact, at the time, it probably felt more like that was a good reason to try to squeeze everything I could out of the life while I was living it here. And there are a lot of things about my background. Again, we don't really need to get into details, but there were some real challenges there. Like there were some real difficulties. And so coming into my young 20s with an attitude like, hey, maybe I should squeeze this for everything it's worth and really get the most out of it was, in a way, an extremely helpful point of view for me to be holding at the time. And eventually the way I understood death and dying changed really quite radically. But that otherwise, I think, relatively ordinary way of looking at it was what I carried right into the midst of my own near-death experience. I didn't have much of any reason to think otherwise. And then ended up with a very direct experience that was quite confounding to that point of view.
So which was first, your near-death experience or your shared death experience?
Near-death experience. Mm-hmm.
So what happened? This was the experience you said that was confounding to all your thoughts, right?
Yes, it turned them completely upside down. So, all right, this, at 29 years old, a good while ago now, I had surgery. It was for a sleep apnea issue. Again, the detail is not particularly important. It's a surgery that's rarely done these days. And it was sort of just a result of a genetic quirk in my case. It's otherwise unusual to have sleep apnea in a healthy 29-year-old guy. But it was a pretty severe case, and the choice made at the time was that surgery was the correct solution. I don't regret that. One of the things that's true about that surgery is that it's an extremely painful recovery. And that you'll see why that's a meaningful detail in a few minutes. But the surgery itself went well. I was in the hospital for 4 days. This was not a sort of operating table kind of thing that we often hear about. The surgery came and went. I was in the hospital. And on the fourth day, they gently kicked me out of the hospital into the care of my father, who was just inclined. He just, I wasn't a kid at 29 years old, but he wanted to watch over me in my recovery. And so he actually picked me up from the hospital and carted me out to the family farmhouse, 2 hours outside Seattle. And that's where I was going to heal up. And there was nothing for him to do, really. There was very little for me to do. I basically, could sit up straight and stare out a window and not a heck of a lot else. And there was really nothing for him to do at all. There was no way that he could aid in, he can't do the healing for me. So he would rumble around and do house chores and farm chores and things like that. And I sort of stared out windows for a few days. On the third day in his care, things got interesting. So late morning on that day, what occurred to me, the experience was simply that there was a very, very, very vivid inner click. It was like, literally, I heard it. And it was in the instant of that click that it was immediately clear that the life force animating this body was beginning to drain away. The body was beginning to die. And there were three recognitions that they flooded in really quite simultaneously, but I can only share them in a way that's linear. And the first of those recognitions that flooded in instantly in the moment of that click was simply that there was this really clear recognition that I wasn't my body. And the way that manifested was simply that in that click, it was instantly clear that the life force was beginning to ebb away, that the body was beginning to die. But that recognition clearly came from a place that wasn't dying. There was it's something that in spiritual language is often referred to as witness consciousness. So there was this immediate sort of bifurcation in my awareness. There was, because, in the normal way of things, I'd always, like all of us, sort of felt like, well, this is me and I'm walking around and my awareness is sort of contained in here. And, I can look down at my own body and recognize that it's my own body and look out at the world and that's the rest of the world and all that's the very ordinary and normal and good. And in this, there was, again, the recognition that the body is beginning to shut down, but that awareness clearly wasn't part of the body because it wasn't in any way changed whatsoever. It wasn't shutting down. It wasn't impugned. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't harmed. There was literally no effect on it in any way whatsoever. And so clearly the body and that awareness were two different things. But that carried with it in that moment a massive additional relevance. And that's because it's also in that moment then that there was an equally clear recognition that the absolutely blackout level, mind-bending pain that had been in that body the whole time and was still there now didn't need to affect me either. If the body was dying, and that's the locus of the pain, but I'm not my body, then it was in that moment then that there was a genuine and sincere total release from the suffering of the pain. I do not mean that the pain was gone. It wasn't. And that body is present as ever. But that very clear awareness, again, wasn't part of the body. And so it didn't need to own that pain. It could be observed just like everything else. It's the first time, and it was not the last time, that I saw and experienced very directly the difference between pain and suffering. Was there pain in that body? Yes. Was I, whatever that was I suffering from it? Not at all. And so there was a complete freedom from the pain. And that conferred a level of freedom overall and release that it begins to be one of those things that's very difficult to put into words. So, yeah, and that was just the very first inkling of the instant of this click. Second thing that floods in at the same time was the clear awareness that the life force leaving this body was doing so at a relatively slow rate. It was like watching the mercury recede in a thermometer, and it was going rather slow. It was very clear that it would actually take a little while. That it was, I couldn't say how fast or how long that would be, but it appeared at a rough guess, at the time that it would be at least a few days. And in fact, that was true. And that's true. But I mention it now because it was what was curious about that recognition, curious about that moment was that instead of meeting the recognition that my body's beginning to die with a form of panic, in a way that there was a part of my mind that was even surprised by this in the moment, but I didn't meet it with panic. It was more like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have some time to hang out here and observe this and experience this. And so far, it's extraordinary and it's amazing. And the clear recognition that I'm not my body and therefore not that pain is a level of freedom that's so remarkable and it's so extraordinary that it feels like an absolute gift to be given some time to sit with this, to revel in it, to soak in it. And if it's going to take me a couple of days to really die, rather than seeming like a problem or a catastrophe or something that needed to be solved immediately, my innate and automatic response was, this is extraordinary. How delightful. What a blessing. The third thing that floods in the moment of that click, and they really do, it's hard to explain how they could be simultaneous, but is something that I have to refer back to the first one for. So, in describing that I wasn't my body, there's a way in which it was as though, even if I wasn't my body, there was still a non-corporeal sense of self, like an individuated sense of self that they keep saying just wasn't contained by the limitations of that body. But it still had a sort of individuated quality to it. Like, I know that's my body, even if I'm not contained by it. But in the third recognition that floods in, it's experienced that even that individuated but non-corporeal sense of self is beginning to dissolve. It's beginning to dissipate. It's beginning to fall away, just like the life force in the body. It's beginning to lose its individuality. And what I want to stress about that, and this is very specifically for anyone that's hearing it and thinking, oh, that might sound terrifying.
Yeah, that sounds horrible to me. I'm not going to lie. I remember you telling me that part, the IANDS. Yeah. It does not sound good to me at all.
And that's why I want to address it right here and right now, because the experience of it was that individuated sense was falling away in favor of what was all-encompassingly whole. All-encompassing. It is still one of those things that's hard to put words around, but if something
I still don't like that.
If something is all-encompassingly whole, then it isn't actually missing anything and can't possibly be missing anything. And so what I would want to convey is that there's simply no sense of loss in it. There's no sense of want or lack or need, because that individuated sense is dissolving into this allness, this wholeness, this all-encompassing oneness. And if there cannot be any sense of lack or want or need, there really cannot be any sense of fear. And there wasn't. It's another one of the reasons that, like I said a moment ago, one of the surprising sort of natural responses to the fact that my body was dying was that it was beatific and beautiful and something that felt like a gift. And this is part of the reason why. So all of that floods in the moment of this click. And that's how that was essentially the state of mind and state of being that I was in the next few days. One of the things I would stress again about it is that if there's no sense of lack or want or need, and there, by that very measure, can't really be any sense of fear at all, one of the things that's true about it, then, many people have heard this, many people listening to this will have heard this phrase in some form or another, is that love is the opposite of fear. Well, if there literally cannot be fear at all, then the sort of automatic natural default setting is something that is overwhelmingly loving. Exactly how it felt. And so when my father appears in the doorway, and again, there's really little he could do anyways, but he'd check in on me every so often throughout the day. There's no impulse in me in any way to say anything to him that would imply that there was a sense of a lack or want or need, and there simply wasn't. There was no impulse to try to explain it. There was no impulse to say, hey, Dad, I'm dying. There was no way in which I could see that as a problem or an issue that needed or demanded to be fixed. It just simply wasn't a problem to begin with. I also knew that there was no way I could explain what I was experiencing to him. Like, there's no way I could look at my father in the eyes and go, hey, Dad, listen, myself, my body, two different things. And you know what? One of them's really rather irrelevant. There's no way I could look him in the eye and explain that in a way that would be meaningful to him. And I knew that. And so I said absolutely nothing. I smiled at him. I felt loving towards him. It felt, tremendously sort of all-encompassingly loving, which is not always how I had a relationship with my father. Like many young men, we struggled with each other, but at times. So I said nothing and smiled beatifically out the window the rest of the day.
And you didn't even think, like, just say to your dad, take me to the hospital or anything like that?
No.
Were, because you were kind of, you were in a different mindset, like in a bliss and wanting.
Yes. Like, again, this is what's, I grant anyone that this would be, strange or difficult to try to wrap one's mind around. But if one is, even theoretically, if you imagine what it might be like to feel something that is all-encompassingly whole, missing nothing, impossible that it could miss anything, and therefore impossible to have a sense of lack or want or need. Like, there's no impulse then that this has to change, this needs to be fixed, this really should be something different, or that we need to go to the hospital. I was elated. I was like, it was gorgeous and thrilling in a way, largely because the experience of the pain was irrelevant. Again, that freedom from, this has been blackout mind. Like, one of the doctors ahead of the surgery had said, Jonathan, sorry about this, but this is one of the reasons we try to discourage people from having the surgery, and it's still one of the reasons it's rarely done these days, is they said, listen, you're going to have to know what it's like to break your femur and walk on it for days. Like, it's going to be mind-bending pain. And that was accurate, for what it's worth. And so to be completely freed from the suffering of that was just extraordinary. And I do hope that there are some people that hear this and when they think about their family member and they wonder if they were really in a lot of pain at some point, it's not only possible, but highly likely that they came to some point in their own journey in which they were able to look past that pain and that they were not suffering it. Yeah. That's a very real possibility. In fact, it's very likely.
Thank you for saying that. 'Cause, yeah, even though I know all this, I still remember my dad towards the end. But I also have the secondary part where he was telling us he was on a train and that he was having lunch, lunch with his mom, who'd been dead since before I was born, and so, and I didn't understand that then. I thought it was hallucinations, but obviously I have a very different understanding. But thank you. I think that, even after all these years of research, that meant a lot to me too, to hear. So you felt this consciousness sort of seeping out of you is the best way to describe it. Was it just sort of this feeling? Did you feel like you were going somewhere, as in like the way, I know it's not the same as like going from one place to another, like on an airplane, but did you kind of feel like you were going somewhere? Did you have sensory input? Like, were you seeing, seeing your body from above and it was getting clearer and clearer and more of your senses were going somewhere else? Like, what? Yeah. As best as you can describe it.
No, I can describe it easily because it's actually pretty simple. It's sort of, in essence, you're asking of like, well, was this an out of body experience? Were you having some form of out of body experience? That maybe that's how we can wrap our heads around. Oh, the pain wasn't yours because the body was, but it was not that in the way that people most commonly describe an out-of-body experience. Here's how it worked. inside me. Unlike an out-of-body experience where people, they literally have, the locus of their consciousness is in a different location. They can look down on their body, which is an experience I eventually had myself a bunch of years later. So I am intimately familiar with it, but this was not that at the time of this NDE. This was the situation of it was that awareness that I was not my body was not because I was outside of it. My perceptual field of awareness was looking out of the usual oculus in the usual way. What was different about it was that the body was recognized as having an illusory quality to it. And if something is an illusion, if it really is an illusion, then it doesn't have fundamental realness. It's right. And what's true about an illusion is that it appears to do something or have qualities or, even act in an illusory world, but fundamentally it isn't true. It has fundamentally no result, or it causes no reaction in the most fundamental sense, because it's an illusion. It is nothingness appearing as something. And so the body was recognized as having this illusory quality, and by extension, and this is a leap for a lot of people to hear, it even meant that the world that this body was in had the same illusory quality to it. But the awareness that was viewing that body and recognizing it as an illusion was recognizing also that illusion wasn't the whole story, that there was some aspect of awareness or beingness that was beyond the limitation of that particular illusion. And so, again, if the pain is in that body, but that body is ultimately an illusion, then that pain can be dismissed, or the suffering of it can be dismissed, even if the illusion is perceived. Once you know it's an illusion, there's some release from it.
What then happened next? I mean, obviously, you didn't keep dissolving away from your body because we're here talking. So what were the next steps?
So, you're right. There was, the perception of this world, by whatever qualities we want to assign it, certainly remained in some fashion. But quite honestly, I simply spent the afternoon in just a state of beatific delight, basically. And I was well aware that the body was still in pain, and also well aware that it was exhausted because it had hardly slept for days, because it's hard to sleep when your body is racked with pain. And so the first thing was there was this recognition of hey, maybe I'll actually sleep. That'd probably be good, for the whole situation here. And I'll bet I could. And that's exactly how it went. I did sleep for the first time in days. And I would wake up during the night, and every time I woke up, I would still check in, is this all still, is my body still dying? Yes, it is. And I can feel that life force. It's ebbing away. It's ebbing away faster. My body's dying a little faster. Am I still merging with the infinite? Yep. That's going in lockstep. The more one of those drains, the more one of them grows. And that's happening a little faster as well then. And the following morning arrives, same deal. I'm still in a state of, very quiet delight. I still have no sense whatsoever that this is a problem or needs to be solved. In fact, it's the opposite. It seems like it's been the most extraordinary experience I've ever encountered, ever in any way. And I literally spend the next, major part of the day. It's actually not until mid-afternoon the following day that my father comes in the room yet again. And for the first time in all the days that he's been watching over me, he looks at me and squints his face up and looks at me funny, and he says, "Hey, Jonathan, I think something's not right. I think we better load up the car and head back over to the hospital." And I think, all right. I mean, he said it. I didn't bring it up. But what he didn't know was that in the hour or two just prior to that, there had been some things that arose in my mind. And one of them was this experience of sort of being given a visual metaphor of that threshold that we often talk about in past life, or NDE ethics. Like, here's the threshold. You walk through that threshold, you're not coming back. It's if you go all the way through the door, then you're done. And there was a sort of a visual representation of that had arisen in my mind that afternoon. And what was powerful about that arising was that it was being presented as a choice. Like, I had a very clear choice. I could choose to walk through it or not. And given what I'd experienced so far, there was a part of my mind saying, well, why wouldn't you go through that doorway? This is the most extraordinary experience you've ever encountered. And it clearly leads to the sort of, walking even more fully and completely into the peace that passes all understanding. Why wouldn't you go that way? I mean, let's face it, this world here, a bit of a madhouse frequently. Why wouldn't you trade that for the peace that passes all understanding? And at the time, it seemed like a good question. And what secondarily arose in my mind as an answer to that question also surprised me, because something arose that said, yeah, I think I'm not going to go through that door. And I think there's some things for me to do here first. And so I'm not going to go through it. And that had been a sort of internal experience. And it was maybe an hour later that my father says, hey, let's go back over to the hospital. And because he says that, I'm like, well, all right. I mean, he doesn't know it, but that whole thing happened. And so his invitation to go back to the hospital just seems like it's consistent with the intention. Like, all right, we'll go. And it's really close. Like, I'm like 52% stay, 48%. What the hell? Go through the door. Why not? I mean, it's still an interesting question to me to this day. And it was partly interesting because at the time, I knew for sure I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing here. Like, this didn't come in that moment with some clear directive, like, here's what you need to do with your life. I was a 29-year-old kid doing my best to be a grown-up and flailing around with that a lot at the time. If I had to answer the question to any other reasonable adult, Jonathan, what do you think you should be doing here on this planet with your life? And I would have spewed a bunch of ideas, and behind all of it would have been this very deep feeling of, I have no idea. I really don't. A little lost, frankly. And doing my best. And so the idea that impulse should come with that kind of clarity, to choose not to go through that door, was frankly a surprise. We go back to the hospital, and this whole thing comes to its conclusion. It's a 2-hour drive. We go back to the same hospital that conducted the surgery. We walk into the ER. The doctors there immediately admit me and confirm my body is dying. It's the first point my dad hears anything about that. And my body's dying for the absolutely dumbest reason in all of medical science. My body is shutting down from dehydration.
God.
Dumbest thing in the world. Again, another issue we don't need to parse here in this venue at this time, but sometimes that's healthcare in America. Why I would have been pushed out of the hospital in a state in which I really couldn't eat or drink is absurd. But that was simply the case. And that's how I ended up in the situation I was in. It's now being confirmed. It's also an extremely simple fix. So they poke my arm with an IV and a saline solution drip. And the instant that saline drip is connected, all of these processes reverse. So I can feel that life force immediately reverse and begin to flow back in. I can feel that merging with the infinite begin to reverse. And like beginning to put my feet more back on the ground right here. They keep me for a few hours, observe, make sure everything's fine, which it is. And late that night, we are back at the farmhouse, and I spend the next 3 weeks there to heal up fully enough. The healing process speeds up immensely. It turns out being, nearly deathly dehydrated is really not good for healing in the first place. But you fix that and things really speed up. And the pain levels come down too. And 3 weeks later, I return. I'm ready enough to go back to my own apartment. I go back to my job and essentially resume regular life. And the question I'm most often asked is, well, how were you changed when you came back to regular life? Right? And the fact is that at that time, the answer was hardly. And what it took was literally 10 years of all kinds of additional experiences that sort of forced me to reconcile with this. It was a long process. What happened when I immediately returned to work was I couldn't reconcile it. Running late, fighting traffic, chugging a coffee, trying not to spill it in my lap on my way to the office and all that sort of thing. And I couldn't figure out how that made any sense in the context of what I know that I knew and see what I'd seen. And I was, all of a sudden in regular life, this body seemed very important. And it was confounded. And so I sort of vowed not to ever say anything about it ever, because I didn't know how I couldn't quite understand it myself. And we'll talk a lot more. And, over the next 10 years, things changed an enormous amount.
Well, before we get into that, because obviously a lot I want to ask you about that, I want to ask you, do you think if you had chosen to walk through the door, then it would have been different? Like your dad would have come in and it was too late, or he wouldn't have noticed at that moment. You think that coincided with some knowledge of your dad? Like he suddenly had the idea, oh, let me see. And he noticed it because of that. And he just would not have noticed it, that you looked that bad, if you had chosen to walk through the door.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I'm capable of actually answering it in any way that's definitive, but I can tell you this much. I knew for a fact then, and I still do now, that if I'd opted to walk through that door, it would have been a completely reasonable choice. It would have been completely okay.
Right.
There would be, it really was an open choice in either way. There was nothing about either choice that wasn't reasonable, actually.
And I just asked that about your, oh, sorry.
Please, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, ask that about your dad, because there's, that theory that all of us, even those of us that have no idea, are constantly downloading information from the other side and our guides and our loved ones. And at that moment, and at that moment, they were pushing through on your dad, being like, notice this. He would never interpret it that way. There's a theory that all of us are doing that. And if you had not made that choice, they would not have done that, and he would not have noticed.
Yeah.
It's a theory. I don't know if it's true, but.
Yeah. There was a beautiful symmetry to that. I agree. And you're entirely right about my father. He was not the kind of dude that in a million years he would not reference his guides.
Yeah. I wouldn't have. I still don't I think I'd question it now, but I'm probably in between, like, maybe someone who really believes this and someone who thinks it's all nuts. I could go either way depending on the situation. I look at both sides of it now, I guess. Sure. And I'm not dead set on one side over the other. There's one side I'd prefer.
Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the
I look at both sides of it now, I guess. Sure. And I'm not dead set on one side over the other. I mean, there's one side I'd prefer, but that doesn't mean it's true. So.
I know my father well enough to know that the closest he could come to referencing something like that would be he would reference Carl Jung, and his use of the word synchronicity.
My mom likes Jung too and doesn't believe any of this. Yes.
Yeah. That's as close as my father could come. And I know there was something in him and I feel like I see this in a little bit in some way in nearly everyone I come across is, that it's like humans have a little bit of a radar for synchronicity. And for some people, it's a little bit more sensitive a radar than others. And for some, there's lots of conditioning that they have that when they recognize that synchronicity, they still reject it out of hand, like, oh, that's nonsense. And yet there still seems to be almost like a natural radio frequency or a sort of a tuner inside the human mind that often dials into a bit of synchronicity. And that's probably about the most I could say in my father's case.
Yeah. I mean, if that's how all humans operate, and some aware of it and some not, and some to higher degrees than others, that means that, even your father, 100% of us operate that way. But who knows? We'll have to. Yeah. That's a whole other topic. I want to get in now. You said a few things. I do want to get to your shared death experience. But before that, you said you had 10 years of experiences that helped you integrate that. I assume your shared death experience was one of them. But before that, what are like a few highlights? Obviously, you can't go into all of them. Maybe pick one or two of the most evidential or significant.
Sure. I would pick two, and I'll try to get through them quickly. Like the near-death experience, these were wildly unexpected. So one of them was an occasion in which I ended up with a clear perception of, these days, given all the people I am around and speak with and have been around for quite some time now, hearing that somebody talk to dead people is really not a surprise in any way at all. But a few years after the near-death experience for me, that was a absolutely mind-bending shock to me. And I'm invited over to a friend's house. This couple, they've been friends of mine for a long time. I arrive. Clearly something is up. Like, my friend and her husband are there, and they both look very somber. She's on the edge of tears the minute I open the door. It takes a bit, but slowly it begins to be explained to me that her aunt has just died, and she's very distraught over this. I never knew she even had an aunt. I'd never heard of this woman. She lived half across the country and all that. And as she's beginning to explain to me why she was tearing up, I have this it's even funny and almost strange and weird to me now, but I had this perception of my own grandfather who had died some years earlier, like he somehow flew through their window and just lit and was standing behind me. And it was so clear that it threw my own equilibrium off so far. I'm sitting in a chair trying to listen to my friend explain this, big dramatic change in her life. And I'm having a really hard time paying attention because my dead grandfather is standing behind me, and he reaches out and puts his hand on my shoulder And I feel it with such clarity and such realness that I reach up to put my hand on top of his. And she watches me make that motion. And there's even, during that, there's a part of my own mind that is just freaking out, going, what the hell are you doing? And what the hell is going on here? Seeing dead people is for crazy people, not for you, Jonathan. What the hell is going on? Is, it's sort of, and in the midst of that, my friend looks at me because she literally watches me do that. And she says, Jonathan, is there something going on with you? And she's like interrupting her story.
Feeling like, because you felt your grandfather's hand on your shoulder as if it was as real as if it really was there, right?
Yeah, 100% yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so my friend stops and says, Jonathan, what's going on with you? And I have this instant moment where I debate if it's remotely possible to explain myself, because I'm not sure it is. And but she kind of just stops and demands an answer, and I don't know what to say. But I guess at the very least, she's the kind of friend that I'm inclined to be really honest with, even if I feel foolish. And so I said, well, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know at all. But my grandfather was standing behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder. He's been dead for 7 years, but that's why you saw me do that. In fact, he's sitting here at the table with us now. And he's here for both of us. And he's here for you. He wants to let you know that your aunt is terrific. She's fine. She's doing great.
That's so, wow.
And and she responds to that. I don't remember what she said, but she did find it comforting a little bit for a moment. And then I said, Michelle, was your aunt, was she about 5'3"? She said, yeah. Did she have sort of mousy brown blonde hair down about here? I said, yeah. Did she like dressing in really bright colors, like big bright primary colors? I said, yeah, she loved that. And I said, well, did she love the color purple? And my friend immediately stops cold and goes, no, she hated purple. And I said, well, and my mind is totally blowing at this moment, by the way. Like, I can't believe the words that are falling out of my face. But I said, well, I don't know how to explain this either, but your aunt is standing about 8 feet behind you right now. And she's pointing at the purple dot on her trousers, like she thinks it's the funniest joke in the world. And that's how you can know, like, even purple is fine with her now. She's good with it. That's how you can know. She's great. She's really good.
Were you seeing her? Like, you
Yes.
just saw her aunt? If you had not known that, if you had just walked in the room and saw her aunt the way you were seeing her, did she look the same as, would you think she was a real person? Was she a little more clear?
I do want to try to be a little more nuanced about it. I hope that I succeed in trying to describe and explain really how that was, in a way, because it's from what I've experienced myself and in conversations with many, many, many other people, this is generally how that kind of thing arises. And it is subtle. It's as I sat there, like here in real life, at a table and chairs with my friend Michelle, and her husband's over here on the left, on my left, and looking behind her about 8 feet, was her aunt standing there in exactly the same way that real life is? Not quite. the image was very clear, but part of the awareness of the image was almost like that it was a projection of my own mind. Like and this is where it gets tricky to explain, but it was like, am I seeing what's in my own mind's eye, or am I seeing it out there? And I know that it's not real in the same way that this table that I'm sitting at with her right now is. I know it's not real quite like that, but it's so clear and so vivid, and yet it's almost like I tried to describe earlier, looking out of my own eyes at my own body and saying, well, that's an illusion. Well, in that illusion, it can seem extremely clear, but it was sort of, the best way I can put it is that it was an extraordinarily clear projection of my own mind's eye out here. And when I've tried to describe that to many, many, many others and hear their stories, and I hear a lot of congruence with people who have seen this or seen ethereal things. It often comes in a way that sounds a lot like that. So, yeah, this had never happened. I mean, there was a part of my mind also just imploded. Like, what the hell is going on with me? Like, I have no context for this. I have no prior experience with this. I'm not around people for whom this is like a regular thing. I've heard about it. It always sounded a little nutty to me. But these are the kind of things that, you know, if and when they do happen to someone, and I think they're a lot more common than we tend to give it credit for, it can shake your world. It's among the things that sort of forced me, for one thing, back into reconciling with my own past experience about what is the nature of this world, what is the nature of this body, what is the nature of death, what is the nature of consciousness, you know. And it's like, it's one of these events that just forces my mind open, whether I liked it or not, to have to reconsider that maybe the way I'd been looking and thinking about the world wasn't the whole story. Maybe there was more to the story than I realized or I'd given credit for. I wouldn't claim to anyone that I understood how it worked, but I couldn't deny the experience, and I couldn't deny that it forced me into a little openness as to the possibility that the way I'd thought about it in the past wasn't a complete understanding.
And then you said you had another experience. There were two. I mean, you said you had multiple, but you said two stood out that helped you integrate or start to understand that something had happened.
Yeah, and then that wasn't, I hadn't thought of, the story I just told you, I had not ever thought of it as a shared death experience. Those are two other stories completely. Maybe we'll get to them.
Right.
But what I was referring to, as you just asked, was a number of years later again, in which I was actually, I've been to two formal retreats in my whole life. One of them was a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat, and I sat still and quietly. I didn't know what I was getting into. I was actually quite unaware of what I was getting into. I liked the idea of silence. I didn't realize that it was 10 and a half hours a day of seated meditation.
Oh my God. I'm not a silence fan. That sounds like literally put me in hell. I don't like silence. I like to talk to people. So
the silence part I was good at and looked forward to it. At that point in my own journey, I was sort of embracing more and more silence in a way I was actually kind of excited about that. But that's not the point of the story. What took place on the second day there was or maybe it was third, I forget, but was, again, a series of events that put me back in touch with that near-death experience in a way that it's hard to imagine anything else could have. And it turned out that to sit quietly with my legs folded beneath me, my butt's on a little meditation bench, I've got cushions all around, as many as I could want or need. But it turns out that if I sit still for long enough, everything below my waist just turns into just racking pain, which I did not anticipate. I just had no idea. And I fight against it, like in a very doodly way. Like, I get in there. These Vipassana retreats are, they're offered very freely often, and you're invited to come, and people can leave whenever they want, and I think there are very few of them where everyone who starts actually finishes 10 days later. People decide they don't want to put up with it. But I had a very sort of, at the time, a very macho dude attitude. Like, I'm going to stick this out. I can tough it out or whatever. I bring it on. I'm going to, And the level of pain that arose was again, it was absolutely mind bending to me. And this is something that I know what real pain is. I've been there before, like real pain, and I could not believe that it arose to that level, and I fought it for hours and hours and hours, and finally, on the second or third day, it just broke me down, and there was a sort of a multi-part to it, but as I'm sitting on that cushion and I'm just that pain was just blackout level, and there was something about fighting against it for days, for hours, that sort of, I guess, forced this unfolding. And the first of it was that all of a sudden unfolding inside of me is the physical pain, first of all, and then something cracks inside of me. And all of a sudden I'm experiencing all of the emotional pain that I've ever experienced all at once, like throughout my entire, it was like having a life review only of the pain. It, like, I saw and felt in one unfolding every single bit of emotional pain that I had ever encountered throughout my lifetime. And it was so overwhelming, especially when combined with the blackout level physical pain I'm already fighting. And all of a sudden, I just lose my marbles. I'm in the middle of a quiet meditation hall. There's 40 other people scattered around me, and benches and cushions, and meditating their butts off in perfect silence. And I am pretty soon, like, I've fallen on the floor and I'm howling and convulsing and just completely losing my marbles. And then it actually gets worse in a way that is so absurd to try to put into words, which is, it feels as though, again, if I'm experiencing all the collective pain of my own life, there's something in my consciousness, my awareness, that sort of feels as though it all of a sudden expands much, 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 much larger. And I end up with the experience of, it sounds even absurd to even put into words at all. I feel as though my individuated mind shows itself in its true state, which is a fragment of the one mind. And that all of a sudden I'm experiencing the collective pain of all of mankind, of whatever we're up to, 8 billion souls. And it feels like 8 billion, the pain of 8 billion souls is just forcing through all of this all at once. And if I thought I was overwhelmed before, the overwhelm reaches a pitch that I absolutely, absolutely cannot possibly express in words. And that goes on until the bell rings, which is about an hour and a half. And the bell rings, and I wish to this day I could somehow send a message to every one of those people and say, so sorry, thank you for your patience. They all quietly got up, and I'm sure were delighted and desperate to get out of the meditation hall.
I mean, did anyone, like a facilitator, come up and see if you were okay, or you were just left, like, howling?
Howling.
Maybe they knew it was like a healing. I don't know. I feel like that's another topic, but
it is. It's apparently, and I really knew nothing about it, like I said, but that is apparently essentially traditional in that, or typical in that tradition. That you're like, that's for you, not anybody else. You do you. we're going to leave you to do you.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
there was,
and were you like having, oh, sorry, come on.
Nope, go ahead. What's your question?
Were you having like visions of other people's pains? Like, were you actually reliving bad things that had happened to you? Was it physical, emotional, all of the above?
Yeah, in
Those are
the
a lot of
initial
questions,
phase of that, where I was sort of like having a life review, but of all the pain parts, it was like revisit. There was like in a flash, it was somehow, it's hard to explain again, but how in one instant you can sort of see all of it all at once. And so it was vivid in its emotional content, it was vivid in its visual content, and it was like all of it all at once. As that sort of morphed into the collective mind, there's just such a vast, I mean, that's 8 billion souls. There was, it was more purely emotional content in that case than it was, somehow seeing 8 billion individual instances of things. But there was a little bit of it. It's like there was sort of like flashes. Like if you could imagine a let's say a gigantic, an enormous ball, and you are actually at the center of it. And on the inside surface of that enormous ball, this globe, is like a little postage stamp picture of every single person and their pain. And you're sitting in the middle of that globe, and that globe is spinning around you. So you sort of see all of it. And yet you're not really picking out the individual data bits with any particular clarity, but you get it, and you're there, and you see kind of all of it all at the same time. You see what I mean? It's about the closest I could come.
Yeah, it's kind of indescribable.
It is. Yeah.
And before we get into your shared death experience, I realized there's a question about your near-death experience I didn't ask you. When you were like at the last stages of it and decided to come back, were you like, there's the realer than real that near-death experiencers say, or that it's just as real.
Mm-hmm.
Did it feel a little more dreamlike, or did it feel like you were actually physically out of your body in a place? Or
so no. First of all, it did feel realer than real, and I would say that makes sense to me, vivid sense to me, and it's very consistent with what I tried to describe in terms of, well, this physical reality, this physical body is what felt as though it had the illusory quality to it. And so what is a little tricky though is, well, then what is the part that seemed realer than real? And what's tricky about it is that we can, here on this planet, in this plane, we can point to 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional time space and be like, over there, over here, over there. We can put things in place, but that the awareness that this was illusory is an awareness that isn't located in a specific particular place. And I'll tell you, there's actually a really good way, I think, for trying to explain that, and it's something that every single person on the planet can relate to. And it's like this. If you think for just a second of someone or a pet that you just really love, and they're not here any longer. They're not here any longer. And you loved them when they were here, and when you think of them now, you still love them. And if you had, like, we can point into the world at something that we did, like an act of love. But if you look at the love behind that act and try to point to where that love is located, it's like it's impossible to you can't put your finger at it like it's there or it's over here. But would you deny in any way whatsoever that the love that you felt was somehow real? Like, of course not. Or whatever it is, whatever we want to call it, it was something that was very powerful. But it's still impossible to locate it in space exactly. And you could point to any particular place anywhere in the world and know that it's not right there, but you know it's still with you. And it could be someone that, or a pet that died long ago, and it hasn't eroded the love that you carry for them one molecule. In fact, maybe it's even grown since then. So the fact is that there is not a single soul on this planet, Liz, that does not have a visceral and personal connection to the experience, that there is something beyond the limitations of this four-dimensional time-space that is powerful for them, meaningful for them, that they touch on a regular, probably daily basis. We all do.
So hearing about the pets like that in love, that was meaningful. Yeah, I have my little babies from my early childhood that I still miss. Lots of my pets.
Yeah.
And just for the sake of time, gotta move on after that kind of meaningful answer. I want to get to your shared death experience, but you also said you were actually out of body years later. Was that your shared death experience, or was that another time that you were thinking of?
No, that was something else entirely. Right.
Okay, you have to tell that, because you can't mention it and then leave us. Okay. Everyone's going to want to know.
Oh, sure,
Let's do that then before the shared death experience, because I'm wondering, and I think everyone else is.
Yeah, it's really pretty simple. And it was like everything else that came my way. It was quite unexpected. And I think one of the things I kind of like about it is that it was so ordinary. Like this was just not, I have never taken hallucinogenics, for the record, ever.
Right.
And, this wasn't the result of dehydration or fasting or meditating or staring at a wall or running a 100-mile ultramarathon or anything like that. This was just me in a regular day of life. Having gone to the office, and I took a lunch break, and I went to the gym, and I'm on the freaking treadmill reading a book. That's it. I'm on a treadmill reading a book, and it was some sort of spiritual book, and I don't remember what I was reading, but what I do know is that there was a quick instant in which all of a sudden I was looking down at the top of my own head. It was like the location of my own perceptual awareness was about 4 or 5 feet above and 2 feet behind me. I was looking down at the top of my own head, continuing to run on the treadmill, looking at the book. I was also looking out at the rest of the gym in a moment of amazement, going, "What the hell am I doing up here? This is wild." And it was pretty quick. I mean, there was just a moment or two passed, and then that perceptual awareness returned to its usual location. And I quietly, and this has been my response to most of these kinds of things, like the near-death experience. I went back to work and basically decided I would never say anything about it ever to anyone. Obviously, that changed, but in the moment of this sort of out-of-body experience, again, I come back into the regular perception, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do with this, and I'm sure as hell not going back to the office and trying to explain it.
Right.
It just became another of those kinds of experiences that continued to crack open my own mind and sort of force the issue with me, or force the reconciliation inside my own mind that there were things about my own mind that I didn't have a full awareness of. There are things about the way I looked upon, thought about, and moved in the world that were very limited in their belief, and that it's like these are the things that forced my mind to consider that there was more to the story than I had previously been willing to allow for. And that eventually leads to a whole, I could talk about experiences all day long, but eventually, these things do lead to some real shifts for me in ways that, over time, and it took a decade, but did eventually just completely reorient my world. It really did. It reoriented completely the way I looked upon it, move in it, think about it, operate in it. There came a point where I completely walked away from regular life, and it's never gone back, and it never will. And that was a tumultuous transition in some ways, but also a very beatific transition in others. And it's one that we haven't even approached yet, maybe for another time. But it led to when it came to having a shared death experience. By the time some of those things began to happen, I wasn't quite as shocked anymore, and they began to sort of feel like they made sense.
So what's your shared death experience?
So there's a couple I can pick from. Here's the one I'm going to go with. This was a case in which I was a passenger in a car. The woman I was dating at the time was driving, and we're in Binghamton, New York, actually, 4 hours upstate from New York City, and I lived up there for a year and a half, and I decide I moved for some reason to put on a piece of music that I love, and I'm kind of a music nerd, and it's a piece of music I long ago decided I think I would play it at my own funeral. It's exquisitely beautiful, piece by a 16th century composer named Palestrina, and I put it on, and to my surprise, I start welling up with tears. And the lovely woman who's driving kind of looks at me like, "What is going on with you?" And I look back at her like, "I'm not really sure. I love this piece of music, but I don't know why this." And she gently pulls over to the shoulder, and I burst completely into tears. And then what unfolds in my mind's eye is a very, very, very clear image, and I'm back at that threshold that I once stood in a near-death experience. But the threshold isn't for me. I'm standing at the threshold with a big smile on my face, with my arms out wide, and I'm ushering someone else through the doorway. And I'm welcoming them as if I'm the host of a house party. And I'm like, "Hey, it's lovely to see you. I'm so glad you're here. It's gonna be great. Come on in. Come right on through." And I knew in that moment that the person that I was welcoming through that door wasn't somebody that I knew. It was not a family member. It wasn't a friend to me. I mean, in the moment of that imagery, it was very welcoming. Like I kind of knew them, but I knew that in regular life here, I did not. And then this unfolds the following day. I get a phone call from another friend, and it's the kind of person that I was delighted at the time, especially. I could say, "Hey, this funny thing happened to me yesterday." She was one of the few people I'm like, "Oh, this will be super fun to tell my friend." And she said, "Well, what did the woman look like?" And I was a little shy about saying it really clearly, because one of the things that was true about the woman I ushered through the doorway is that she was extremely plain, like a really simple bob haircut, and very like this was as far from a fashion plate as you could get, and someone that, and I was very shy about saying this as well, but they had the implication was also that she was sort of simple in appearance, but also a bit simple in mind, actually, like. And I tried to say that in a way that was kind of glossing over it a bit, a little gentle. And but I described her in detail, and you'll probably see where this is going immediately. And she said, "Let me stop you there, and I want to thank you, because you just ushered my aunt into the afterlife, and." Last night, we were all surrounding her bedside and watching her go. And I'm so glad you were there to welcome her in." And my aunt had lived in a group home for all of her whole adulthood, because she was sort of a special needs person. Yep, that you described her just right, in her appearance and in her mind. I'm so glad that she got to be welcomed by you. Thanks for being there. And of course, I'd had no awareness of this whatsoever. That event with those family members, it turned out, I believe it was taking place that night in Rochester. As you well know, it's hours and hours away from Binghamton, and it's a town I've never been in. So, by that point of the journey for me,
Hi! So, exciting news. Book number 2, WTF Just Happened. A sciencey skeptic investigates even more evidence of an afterlife and fights for justice with her dead dog, is ready. You can get it everywhere in both ebook and paper. This book essentially picks up where WTF Part 1 left off. I continue to experience a bunch of what the fuckery, and it's a bit different now because I know the mediums pretty well, so I get some actual opinions on what they thought of me when they first met me. I get more crazy signs, and the evidence just keeps accumulating. I keep bugging my dad for that one sign I really, really wanted, and some really crazy stuff happens related to that. I conduct experiments with psychic medium Joe Peretta, and again, bunch of what the fuckery. And in a really weird twist, I get called as a secondary witness to testify in the Harvey Weinstein case, which is a secondary plot. And that results in my dog, Peanut, who is on the other side, and sending me some signs, ends up becoming famous. So, if you want to keep hearing about scientific evidence of an afterlife and this really bizarre side story, you can go order my second book in the series. I love getting to say that now. WTF Just Happens, actually a series. So you can go to my website, and that links to everywhere this book's available. It's available in ebook and print, not yet audiobook. That's not going to be nearly as long as it was for book 1, but it's going to be a few more months. So you can go to my website and order WTF Just Happened. A sciencey skeptic investigates even more evidence of an afterlife and fights for justice with her dead dog. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened. A sciencey skeptic explores grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, You don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?